If a game company has ever published a violent game, I believe personally that they must apologize and pay reparations to the families involved.
Hello everyone, today's video is a very contentious one. There's been a lot of talk lately about whether or not video games can cause violence and the other negative side effects that extended exposure to video games can have. Well, in today's video, we're going to be getting to the bottom of this. But I don't have to travel this road alone. To use a video game metaphor, this is a co-op mission. I'm here with my very good friend, Neville.
Hello, comrade, and also don't forget about our very special guest today.
Yes. Later in the video, we're also going to hear from our site lead, Babi, Faye Fair, and the Twitter phenomenon, Katie, ZipZer. For your viewing convenience, I'll be adding timestamps in the video description. These will act as sort of a table of contents and let you freely skip around the video.
For the racists and sexists out there, please do be kind to our guests in the comments. I think this is their first time being on YouTube.
And without further ado, let's just get right into this video. If somebody wanted to show the negative side effects of the gaming community, one doesn't really have to look any further than the gaming community. It is hard to find a Let's Player who hasn't said something deeply problematic in their past. I mean, in the heat of the moment. But is this problem systematic? I mean, I don't know how many times I've been trying to research a game online, and half of the forum posters have literal swastikas in their PFPs.
I actually made a whole video about this. I'm sure Norm can put the link in the description. To me, though, it seems like, in general, the gaming community reeks of toxic masculinity. For example, the sexism in these shooter game communities is disgusting. You see people slut-shaming players who want to be healers, or assuming that anyone who is femme-presenting, so you could say, is a gamer girl. Like, femboys exist and femme-persons and gamer-persons.
I remember a while back when I tried to get into gaming, at a younger age. I was just trying to get close to my stepdad at the time. I was sort of in an Xbox Live chat. I think I was playing one of those Call of Duty games or something like that. Anyway, it was awful. I'm genuinely traumatized by just how nasty the folks in the chats were being. They were calling me the F slur, squeaker, which I don't even know what that means, and the N-word, which is horrific because I'm not a POC. Needless to say, after that, I was just turned off from gaming.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, Norm. The worst part is, you try and tell your story, and people just victim blame. I'm sure there's people in the comments just asking why you just didn't mute them, as if that's going to solve the problem.
I couldn't figure out how to mute them!
It's alright, Norm. It's often they make it so convoluted just to silence the voice of these online harassers, and making it so that you don't hear them. It's not enough. Because they can still be racist, they can still be homophobic, and they can still be sexist just by existing, just by being there.
I think the problem with the gaming community is that the community is there. It's built on the shock value. People will say outrageous, offensive things just to quote-unquote troll me, but they don't realize somebody's on the other end of that. I think they're also desensitized, largely because of the gameplay experience.
How so, Norm?
Video games that feature violent content, or video games that are over-competitive, seem to breed these toxic communities. And I know, it can be cliche to blame video games for violence, but one thing that we can be sure of is that these competitions create adrenaline, which can have adverse effects on the brain if it's left soaking in them for too long.
Kind of like if you make a funny face. Your face can get stuck like that. Honestly, I think that is the scary part. These game developers make it just so you get addicted. So it's not hard to see why folks will spend thousands of hours in these perverted, disgusting virtual worlds. Plus, when a community turns toxic, it just compounds into other problems that gaming too much can cause.
Yeah, the community is a big part of it. But I feel like the game devs are at fault too, They should know that kids are going to get a hold of these games, and they're going to get stuck in these addictive gameplay loops that sort of are often fueled by very toxic capitalism.
Toxic capitalism? Oh, so like pay to win, that kind of stuff. I think that's one of the big things that is ruining the next generation. These games are teaching them that they can use capitalism to get ahead in life, and really the only thing that capitalism brings is more racial disparity.
If a game dev is not actively fighting against racism, transphobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, they are part of the problem.
I remember I was trying to play Animal Crossing because someone had falsely informed me that it was trans inclusive. When I went on the game, I didn't find an option for Novigender as my character, and that was deeply upsetting. I ended up crying for a week after that incident. The makers of Animal Crossing need to replace the Switch. I ended up breaking because of this disgusting transphobic game.
Stay strong, comrade.
That wasn't even the worst gaming experience, Nob. A few years ago, I recall a former friend, let's say, suggested I play GTA, as we all know, a hate game. Well, I just thought, oh, at the time, obviously, I didn't know that, so I thought, oh, a fun driving game. So I stopped playing it, and the first thing I noticed was how the sexualized Kate Upton-looking character in the box, how problematic that was. I decided to ignore the signs and go further, and I began driving around in the free play mode, and I accidentally bumped into another car. No big problem, but at that point, the police come after me. Sirens blaring, the lights flashing. I was playing as a POC lesbian at the time, and being chased by the police, that was scarily real. It was terrifying. Knowing just how the police treat POCs, I just floored it. I was scared. I was filled with terror. Like in a really, I just can't even right now. It's so hard. But what happened next made me destroy my PlayStation because of the pursuing police officers. I wasn't able to stop at a red light. And I hit a pedestrian. But that pedestrian was a POC woman of size, possibly trans. I was mortified. I had a sensory overload and destroyed the PlayStation. And I hurt my I had to call an ambulance. When I tried to get Rockstar to pay for the damages, they never responded.
Oh my god. That sounds awful. It's not your fault. It was the cops' fault. These companies need to pay for the anguish they put well-meaning game players through. The other thing these companies need to do is remove voice comms altogether. No one uses them for the game. They just use them to vent all that toxic adrenaline that's building up in their body, that's pumping through their veins. I mean, if you are watching this video and you don't believe that video games cause unnatural violence, just go into one of these voice chats in any competitive game.
Plus, these comms they're always exclusionary. Like, if you try to join in or ask a question, you get cussed out. I tried talking about my interests and hobbies like feminism and journalism and everything like that, but you just get attacked. When these devs put unmoderated voice comms in, they are complicit in the sexist boys club that these chats turn into.
Yeah, and they really need to get this cuss filter straight. They should just get the same filter that Twitter uses to hide all those problematic tweets.
Speaking of tweets, we have our good friend Katie here to talk about the tweet that alerted the whole world that there was a problem with this everyday hobby. Welcome, Katie.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Neville. There have been a lot of videos recently about my tweet, but this is actually the first time that I've been given a chance to come and give my side of the story. So I do really appreciate that.
Just in case anyone is unfamiliar with the tweet that we're talking about, I'll put it on screen now. And if you could just explain for a moment about what it actually means from your perspective.
Yeah, of course. I would also just like to preface this by saying that I had absolutely no idea the tweet was going to get as much traction as it did, or that it was, going to cause such an uproar or an outrage the way it did in the gaming community. I do recognise that my views aren't necessarily conventional, but it was really upsetting to read the things that people were saying about me. A lot of people automatically dismissed me, they devalued what I said, and they didn't take the time to try and see where I was coming from. I did watch a couple of the YouTube videos about me, and the majority of them said that there were only two options for who I was. I was either insane or I was a troll, and that was also very hurtful. So, to get into the tweet, basically what it was about was I was speaking about the inverse effects of adrenaline, specifically how it relates to pattern violence in video games. I do realise that adrenaline is created in other activities, but I personally chose to focus in on video games, and I can get into more detail on that in a second.
Okay, but why are some video games worse than, let's say, croquet or badminton?
Video games do a number of other things to the brain that compound and accentuate the effects of the adrenaline. Example, there's oftentimes subliminal messaging, specifically in action games. These subliminal messages can range between making you spend more money on in-game purchases, microtransactions, to internalizing the game's message of violence. Action-based games are designed so that your brain releases dopamine whilst you're revved up on adrenaline, which can be an incredibly dangerous mix to have. The reason for this is it causes your brain to associate the feeling of happiness with that of an adrenaline rush.
What would you say is so bad about wanting adrenaline?
Well, the problem is the desensitizing nature of actually having artificially raised levels of adrenaline in your body to begin with. After a while, the video games you're playing will eventually lose their edge, and a lot of people will look elsewhere for that specific adrenaline rush. Whether that's endangering someone's life via reckless driving or participating in violent behaviour, they could just rage, they could break things in their own home. I'm not able to say for certain. But what I do know, and what I am going to ask people who claim that gaming isn't an addiction is, I'm going to ask you to please justify burnout to me. I've done a lot of research into the topic of burnout, and it has very similar symptoms to what withdrawal has. The only fix is to play more extreme games. So say you can start off by playing Animal Crossing. Well, maybe in a few years you're starting to play Wolfenstein, and you're starting to sympathize with the Nazis. You know what I mean? It's a very steep ladder to go down.
Wow, I had no idea that this was such a serious issue.
Yes it is, and I do take serious issue with the fact that game developers try to get the public to turn a blind eye to it. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that gaming corporations do spend a lot of money on crooked studies and propaganda, specifically on how video games do not cause violence. I realise that's a bit of a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but I'm 100% convinced. From the research I've done and the studies that I've done, I am sure of it. It's almost been conditioned into us now to watch YouTube compilations of people raging, or people rage quitting, or, insulting people as soon as you join voice chat. They say, "Oh, you're a woman, make me a sandwich." We cannot in good conscience continue to finance the poisoning of the youth that way. If a game company has ever published a violent game, I believe that they must apologise and they must pay reparations to the families that have been affected by the violence of their own child.
I really agree with what Katie said. The key to playing computerized games in an ethical way is to do your own research on the companies that make these games and thinking critically about who you can feel comfortable financially supporting. There is a little cheat code, however, to knowing if a game is ethical or not. It's called inclusivegamers.com. They do the research so that you don't have to. We're super lucky to have Gamer-in-Chief Babi here to tell us how fair games ethically.
Thanks for having me, Neville and Nom. One of the things I want to get out of the way is that we're not anti-gaming. We are anti-unethical gaming. However, if properly moderated, we believe that gaming can be used to tell the stories that need to be heard, show people who would otherwise be unseen, and raise the spirits of those who are walking difficult roads. If you're trying to figure out if a game is ethical, the first question you should ask is, what's its message? Both the one it presents and the one it actually impacts.
What sort of messages should we be trying to avoid? And what should we be looking for in a game that we want to enjoy?
Well, a big thing you need to avoid is unjustified violence. Just like in the real world, we never advocate for needless violence of any kind. However, if a game has an important story, see The Last of Us 2, it is permitted to have some sort of violence. But only if it's supported by a progressive plot. When it comes to violence in video games, the big thing you want to avoid is games that seem to make light of violence. Examples would be Mortal Kombat, where things are so gory it is easy to become desensitized. Desensitization is a big risk you can take, even when playing otherwise approved games.
How can people avoid getting desensitized, or, I think more importantly, having their kids become desensitized?
I believe we really need to reform the ESRB rating system. First violent game, if we even allow them, should be 25 plus, because that is the age where your brain stops developing. Developing mind is the most at risk for permanent brain damage as a result of playing video games. With a reform of ESRB, we should also create a council that can approve video games to ensure they contain no dog whistles or violent programming. This council needs to be multiracial and multigendered. These gatekeepers would stop a lot of these awful, hateful, hurtful games from coming out.
I know so many of these games are so hurtful. What games would you even let through?
At this point, any game that's not directly challenging the systemic transphobia, racism, and homophobia in the gaming community is part of the problem. At least at first, I think the Games Council should only let through games that work to tear down the sexist systems. It'll take time, but soon gamers of all genders and creeds will thank us for the games that are being put on display and the brilliance that comes from LGBTQ inclusion.
Lucky we don't have to wait for that council to get gaming, because there are already a few journalists who approve games, right, Norm?
Yeah, that's right. At the moment, there's already a few journalist-approved games. However, we're going to be expanding that list in the near future, so keep an eye on our social medias for a full printable list that you can keep beside you while you go video game shopping. I'll just list a few here because this could make its own video. But if you think of any that we forgot to mention, feel free to drop them in a comment. A good example of a J-approved game that I can think of right now off the top of my head is Tetris. Not only does this game have a beautiful story about breaking down walls, but it also has a great sort of person of size message about how no matter your size, you can still fit in.
Tetris is a blast, but have you got anything a bit more modern?
Well, believe it or not, the Fallout games are journalist approved. Not the ones made by Bethesda, but games like Fallout New Vegas and the first two have long been a part of journalist culture. This is an example of a game that can be a bit gruesome and one may even consider quote unquote violent, so there is a trigger warning involved. However, if come at by the proper angle, you can play the game as a tool to learn politics because it creates a perfect microcosm of the United States politics within a game. It's truly a great game for any up and coming journalist.
For new games, I was thinking about The Last of Us 2. I know that it presents some brilliant GLBTQIA+ themes that Babi has just told us about. What about games that you can adjust the settings to make them peaceful, like Minecraft?
Glad you asked about Minecraft. Minecraft is a classic example of a good game gone bad. Initially, we saw a lot of promise in the game. The way that you're able to help people express their creativity in a safe way. We'd heard some terrible things about its creator, Notch, and we'd heard some really bad things about certain communities inside of it, but we decided, despite our concerns, to sort of make a server and give it a try.
Oh, I remember that. It was raided, right?
It was raided, hacked, vandalized, griefed. Trolls just did about everything they could to ruin this server. And it had such a noble goal. It was made to show people, to show the world, how we could reconnect online during the COVID-19 pandemic. We were naive. We were trusting. We thought the gaming community could give up its toxicity just for a minute to participate in something beautiful. But we messed up.
And people wonder why we're so cynical and critical about games. If only they knew the terror that we were put through. And we gave gamers a chance to surprise us, and they failed.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about what happened here, in the description below, I'll link an inclusive gaming article that kind of just goes into detail about the Minecraft server. I'm also planning in the future, if I get to it, to make a sort of cabin stories video about it to sort of fill you in on my side of the story as a moderator for that server. With that, I think that we're about ready to end this video. I would again like to thank our featured guests, Katie and Babi, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Of course,
Thanks for
I
having
can't
me.
forget my good comrade Neville as well.
A pleasure as always, Norm.
So again, everyone's social media links will be in the description box below. Make sure to check them all out. No trolls, please. Subscribe to the channel if you want more updates on the improved gaming list. Thanks everyone for watching. Goodbye and have a fantastic day.